Thank you all for being here. It's great to see you all. Welcome to the Arthur Erickson Centennial Symposium. I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We are situated on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Stolo, I would add in, nations. And of course, they've been in this part of the world for time immemorial, and I think as all citizens of this place currently called Canada, it's critical that we are always considering why we do a land acknowledgement. What does it mean? What does it portend for how we move forward? But extra significant for architects and landscape architects and planners because we are working very directly with the land. Today's event is part of SALA's fall lecture series. On the image before you right now is the full roster. After today, we have 4 events, and I encourage you to come to all of them. Every year, we put a lot of energy curating a set of events that we think are critical to architecture, landscape architecture, and urban design now. We have a sub-series this year on climate change. So 3 of the 4 events coming up are climate change focused. Of course, can't stress enough how important that topic is to our professions. And then very excitingly, one of the events is a book launch that will take place at Inform. It's a book by my colleague at SALA, Leslie Van Duzer, on another of my colleagues, Bill Peckett's work. And it's a long overdue monograph that we are tremendously excited by. I think maybe I didn't say who I am in case you don't know. My name's Matthew Souls. Sorry, I didn't say that off the bat. I'm a professor of architecture at the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture at UBC. Why I'm here, other than being a huge fan and lover of the work of Arthur Erickson, as I think we all are, I happen to be the chair of the outreach committee. So in the planning of these events every year, I work with a great group of great colleagues coordinating and planning the events. So a few quick words about today's symposium, and then we'll just jump into it. So today's symposium is the result of a collaboration between the Arthur Erickson Foundation and SALA. So every year, SALA has, as part of its event series, a lecture that's in commemoration for Arthur Erickson's tremendous visionary legacy for Vancouver, for this region, Canada, and beyond. That's the Arthur Erickson Memorial Lecture. We do it every year. We've had an incredible number of leading international practitioners participate in that lecture. Carme Pigum, Fumihiko Make, Winnie Moss, Tatiana Bilbao last year. So we always do this. And it's important to note that Arthur taught for a brief period of time at SALA. So Arthur is very dear and close to what we do at the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture. Of course, Arthur was born in 1924 in Vancouver. So 2024, the centennial celebratory year, the commemorative year of his birth. So the Arthur Erickson Foundation has been doing a tremendous job since March of 2024, when they think it was the first lecture as part of the AE 100 series lectures in celebrating Arthur's work. So they've had a fantastic exhibition. There's been a premiere of a documentary. There's been street festivals. And I think a total of 15 events, lectures of, Winnipeg, Saskatoon, Palm Springs Design Week, across Canada and across in the United States as well. So in a way, this symposium is a kind of conceptual merger between our annual Arthur Erickson Memorial Lecture, where we bring in an exciting practitioner to our city, and the Arthur Erickson Foundation's ongoing efforts. So this is the culminating day of what has been a fantastic kind of over a year-long set of celebrations. And it's a full day of events. And of course, you've all seen the kind of list of people involved. And it's a tremendously rich and diverse group of individuals that we're hoping to, we know we're going to have a fantastic day exploring Arthur's visionary legacy, the meaning of his work today, why it continues to be relevant. And I hope we're going to have some probing, kind of loving and celebratory conversations, but also kind of critical examinations of what the work means today. So it's very, very exciting. The first roundtable is titled, and I will, should have had that slide up, the Lessons on Design Collaboration and Studio Culture. It's moderated by David Covo, who's sitting in the center there. I'm going to turn the mic over to David in one moment. I want to point out that on this handout, there is a small error. Under David Covo's bio, the information there is merged with Barry John's bio information. So they become one super person. Under David's getting all the credit. So we want to point out that one, impossibly superhuman being described there is actually two amazing human beings, David and Barry. So where it says a past chancellor, sort of halfway in that paragraph, that's where Barry starts. So David, I'll just say very quickly, is he's an architect. He is an associate professor at the School of Architecture at McGill. He's a past director of that same school, and he's been teaching there since 1977. So he's an incredibly significant pedagogical leader in this country. I've only had the great pleasure of getting to know him a little bit in this process of organizing, and I've come to know him to be an incredibly thoughtful and kind of tireless advocate for the significance and importance of architecture in this country. He is the current president of the AEF, so leading much of these efforts over this last little while that I described, and he's been critical in the organization of today. And among other things, in 2024, he was the guest curator of Being There, an exhibition at the Canadian Centre for Architecture in Montreal that looked into Arthur's travels. Of course, Arthur was a big traveler, and how those travels influenced Arthur's writing, his view of the world, and his architecture. So with that, I will ask David to begin his moderation of this morning's panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. As I just said to the people in front, Barry and I are close, but we're not that close. We've collaborated for many, many years on many different kinds of projects. And thanks once again to UBC Sala and UBC Robson Square for accommodating this very exciting joint venture between the school and the foundation in this exercise. This is, I think, the second to last event of the 18-month-long series of events celebrating Arthur Erickson's centenary. The last event is a lecture by Michael Prokopow, a member of one of this afternoon's panels, who will be lecturing at McGill on October 20. The theme for this roundtable came up, I think, as a result of a number of discussions between many of us on the foundation and at the School of Architecture of UBC, and on the organizing committee of the symposium. And in conversations with the so-called alumni, you're one of the 300 or 400 architects who went through Arthur's practice over the 50 years, more or less, of his life in various forms. Talk often about the nature of their culture in the office and the collaborative spirit. It was actually Eva Matsuzaki who talked about the kind of the openness as, and I quoted from her in the summary, made it a joy to go to work every day. So the purpose of the roundtable is to explore, to some extent at least, the notion of collaboration, the concept of the design culture, and the role played by not just Arthur Erickson, but by his key collaborators in the office, many of whom are in the room. I count a number of the so-called geezers, most of them sitting very close to the front of the room. And I'll reread just to establish the context. The theme that we put together, which you may have read already, but I'll read it again just to emphasize it. Arthur Erickson, we wrote, often referred to the workplace as an atelier, and many of the distinguished architects who worked with him over the years remember it in those terms. An open space without hierarchy, filled with large models of projects underway, where design was the common language between architects from all over the world, and collaboration itself was valued, enabled, and always encouraged. The three panelists will share their critical perspectives on their own experience with Arthur and with each other in the studio culture that made it, according to Eva, a joy to go to work every day. I say three panelists, you see only two in front of you. We lost Bielaska a couple of days ago to COVID. He left, I spoke to him on the phone this morning, and I could hardly recognize his voice. He's recovering, and he's, the extent of his distress after all the work we've done as a group of four to put this together, of not being able to be here, was palpable. We talked about it yesterday. We spent a lot of time examining alternatives, and we came up finally with what we're going to do, which is that we're going to present the images that he wanted us to present, and I will read as a kind of summary. I can't impersonate him. Those of you that know him, he's not impersonatable. But I will try to draw from the many notes that he shared with us about what it was like to work in that last phase of Arthur's career with you. So let me begin by introducing my two colleagues here. Barry Johns is a past chancellor of the REIC College of Fellows, two-term chancellor of the college. He spent the first 6 years of his career with Arthur in Vancouver in the late 70s, and the next 40 managing his own very successful career in Edmonton, Alberta. His recent publication, very recent, which is going to be reviewed, I think, in the next issue of Canadian Architect, Effective Urban Densification, is based on his doctoral research at the University of Calgary. It introduces backfill, a new approach, which was the subject of his dissertation, to the housing crisis. Eva Matsuzaki is one of two women in a class of 40 at Cornell in the 1960s. She was the first woman president of the REIC, and between 1974 and 1984, with Arthur Erickson Architects, she worked on Robson Square as a member of the project team, and on the Vancouver Art Gallery as associate in charge in charge of that project. In 1984, she formed Matsuzaki Wright Architects and was the lead on the C.K. Choi building at UBC. Barry and Eva will also be guiding the tour of Robson Square half an hour or so after we finish this session. Let me start. There's the first slide. The way it's going to work is first Eva, and then Barry will kind of establish an agenda for the conversation that we hope will follow. I will do my best to follow them with the slides, and if occasionally I jump around a little bit, it's because one of them might have said, "Please, you should have changed slides 2 slides ago," or "Please go back to that second slide." So I'm going to start, Eva, with you.
Okay, I thought I would start with context. So this is, you could still go by there at corner of Laurel and 8th Avenue, is just a gray box. But when you go inside, it's this marvelous 2-story space. The walls are daily washed, and it's just a sea of desks. That's where it was for the 10 years. There are no cubby holes, no partitions, just some ferns here and there. And most of the desks had either drawings or working models on them. Also, to me, the important thing was this is where Arthur worked. It wasn't in a conference room or somewhere in his office. It was there. When he was in town, which was, he was very much a traveling architect by that time. He would come down and just choose a desk, or we kind of wave him down, and he would sit up one of the chairs and we'd work away. And I think you could tell by the setting that there really wasn't hierarchy. It was just, he would wander through there, and also we would wander by each other's desks, and for most of us, we haven't worked in other places where we were so involved in the other person's work. We'd always criticize and question, and that's what we're calling collaboration. This is my choice of just explaining how we worked. So these are Canada geese, and the one that's in the front, the leader, when it gets tired, it just drops back. Right? So it's never the same goose all the time. So our point of view was that Arthur was the lead goose in the early phases. And then he'd drop back, and and then some other goose takes the head role, and you take turns. And for us, that might be whoever was building the model, or it might be a consultant, but the point being that everybody was involved. And there's that one that's can you see it in the design lessons? There's one gray one there, and there's always somebody who's out of sync, right? Can you see it? Yeah, okay. Then the other thing was, we were at Robson Square in the sort of 70s, and this is without exaggeration. If there were 30 of us working on it, every single person was in their 30s. We didn't have a person over 40. And when you think about it, it's amazing. There was this huge project, and everybody's in their 30s. So we were ambitious. We were full of energy. And my favorite part was we were sassy, right? And so one day we wrote these design lessons. And the first one says, I can remember them without looking. First one says you have to be unique. So if it's done before or it's in a catalog, forget it. Unique is rule number one, right? We said it has to make the magazines, if you do another ordinary thing. Slip and slide. Do you know that one where, no, you don't create a box. Boxes are boring. So everything is broken into pieces, and it has this sense of infinity or sliding away. You don't know where it's going to end. For most people, the favorite part is when in doubt, cover with growies. So that meant, if you're working on a corner of the building and upstairs, you can see that there's all of a sudden you don't know what to do. Put planting on it. Right? So you go upstairs and there's a lot of planting. So it tells you. Okay, let's go to the next one maybe. All right. I think there's two images we have here that really we worked in model, and it was always working models. They weren't presentation models. I don't even ever remember seeing a presentation model in the office. They were all out of cardboard and held together with straight pins, like literally, as you're sewing, they would be in your mouth. And the advantage to that was that you could, while you're talking, especially with each other or with Arthur, you just unpin and reposition. And that was our methodology, really, through the whole time, and all the projects I ever saw or was involved in. And it was like, somebody was talking about that they put the model a certain way, and then Arthur comes by and thinks, no, the entry should be that way. Right? Just unpin it, move it. Maybe we can do the next one there. Yeah, so that's just another example of the cardboard that we did. So you can do it quite carefully, right? But it's cardboard and held together. No glue was the rule. No glue. I think the other thing that ripples out of that is that we had you create options, right? So before Arthur comes to discuss, let's say, the planter, or we call them the boxes on either side of the stramps, there would be many ways to do that. So whoever's working on that part would do it at least, let's say, 2 or 3 ways. And we called it options. So then he'd come and we'd look at it and study it. And often a hybrid would come out of it. Not sort of, if you have A, B, C, it doesn't mean that you would pick solution B. You'd find something that worked, right? But it's based on the philosophy that there is no one right answer. You just keep exploring and you just keep doing another set of alternatives and you just keep working at it. And we call that optionitis, when you don't know how to stop doing options, right? And I think the other important part to me was the open mind attitude. And that was that in that no hierarchy, and this will be attested by many people who worked there. It didn't matter if you were a student or an architect with 10 years experience. It was always interesting what each person thought. There was the motto I remember and liked was that there was no stupid idea. It was all was on the table. And I think those, in fact, stimulated both the architect and the other folks on the teams. Part 2, it's the opposite. The first one was very general, right? How we work. This one is very specific. I want to talk about entrances at the Robson Square project, or really the 3 blocks, starting with the art gallery over to the courthouse. Okay, so this is just the overview to say this is the topic of this part. Okay, so the art gallery, I start with the fact that when we started that project, we looked at the facade facing Georgia Street, right? Grand stairs, lions on either side. And everyone assumed that would be the new entrance because it said entrance, right? And the first thing that happened is with the team, and every time I say Arthur, I really mean the team. It wasn't that one person didn't do it all. Said, no, turn it around. Do it on the side facing Robson Street, because then it's not turning its back on the whole public aspect. And you could see that it's at grade. There's no issue. Like on the other side, you'd have to figure out how anybody with a disability would get up into the art gallery. This way, you just stroll right in. And on the Hornby Street side, there's also a smaller entrance. Okay, now the main occupant of the project was the provincial government offices. Right? Those are the ones that are buried under the park, right? When the client gave us the job, I don't think they knew this is where it was going to go. But anyway, so if you want to go to the provincial government offices, you'd go to 800 Hornby Street. Just slide in under the flying planters there and that under the growies. So it's the point being that it isn't the grand stairs and the lions. It's just what I call a quiet entry. Similarly, at the courthouse, the new courthouse, everybody sort of is familiar with it now. But when you think about the traditional courthouse, entries were in the middle and grand. They were symmetrical. And in this case, they're at the end, and you go into the grand hall. And it's another one where it's not, the entrance isn't what the building is about. And even when you go in, it's all terraced. So again, you have growies at every level. It's worth mentioning that when talking about entrances, it also goes down to the detail of courtrooms. And again, the traditional courtroom is you come in on axis, and the judge is there on a podium above, and you bow down. They wish. And Arthur's or the team's concept was to come in sideways, so that it wasn't immediately toward the grand judge. Well, guess what? The judges didn't like that. So, and there was the Chief Justice at the time was Justice Nemetz, and he was the only one who supported the architect's scheme. And I think there are 35 courtrooms in there, and there's like 1 or 2 that are done the way it had been proposed. All you have to do is move the door, right? But the concept is that your client, you need them to support what you're trying to do. Now here comes the role model. It's a Japanese entrance to a temple or to a Katsura palace. It's nice and quiet. It's not the event. The event is once you're inside. And I think like the courthouse is a perfect example of that. The entrance is not what it's about. It's when you're inside that is architecturally what you've created. So I'm making the plea for quiet entrances. That's what at least the team was working on, and not the big loud ones. Where's Jane? I'm trying. So, okay, let's go to the next slide. So my answer is to the UBC, who have put these signs. There's the big metal one. There's one on the top of the stairs. There's top on the other, where the doors are, all trying to say over here, over here. And I'm thinking, if these people have university degrees or want university degrees and they can't find the door, I mean, really. People, they say people downtown don't know we exist. Well, let's make lions, grand stair and lions, then they'll know we're here. Obviously, I'm being a little harsh here, but the point being made. One more thing before I depart. Not many of you will have seen or know about this, but I did work on it for a while, maybe 6 months or a year at the most. And this, the client was the government of Canada. This was supposed to be the government of Canada's building in Vancouver. This was going to be on the lot right near Queen Elizabeth Theatre. So in the heart, right near where the current Central Library is. And the concept was that there's something like 250,000 square feet of space in each of those spaceships. And but what I liked, I think it's the weirdest looking thing I've ever seen, but it is slip and slide. You'll notice they're slightly different heights, slightly different movements left and right. But the concept I found very interesting, because as opposed to Robson Square, where the facilities are under the park, at that one, the ground plane again was going to be a park, and the facility was up in the air. But it never happened. I don't know the details of why, but it came and went, and somebody called it two spaceships passing in the night. Oh, and my final one is my favorite image. This was in the office that I started with, and that is a 1/4 inch to the foot cardboard model that we had done in pieces. And at one point finally realized they could all go together, and it ended up being approximately, how come we're losing that, 20 feet long. And that's a very small percentage of the people that worked on the building. But I don't know why that day we just said, let's take a photograph. And a couple of the faces might be familiar. Oh, and guess who's got something to say? Okay, thank you very much, and I will hand it over.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Eva. I have to make a correction. I was 26 going on 27 when I started in the office. So I am the pup, and it's a humbling experience to be part of this group because I looked up to everybody in the office. I kind of wish that we were in the theater next door. It's my favorite space in all of Robson Square, and I spent a long time working on it. I think one of the points I wanted to make with this slide, again with the model, is that although only a portion of the total team is represented in those photographs, for some reason we didn't take a lot of photographs of one another unless we were doing it to make models, and I'll show you an example of that. We also had, in addition to a large team, Robson Square had an enormous consulting group from all around North America. And our consultants, we had consultants for everything. We had acoustics, AV, lighting, glazing, landscaping, of course. Building code, atriums were not part of the building code back in that day. Concrete consultants, we even had a painting consultant. So the next slide is, again, of models to just reinforce the idea that the model making was part of the zeitgeist of the office. We all drew, we all knew how to draw, but we all knew how to cut our fingers with X-Acto knives and build models to explore ideas from the exterior of the building to the interior of the building. And what was fascinating about it for me is that when we would emerge from a meeting with one of our consultants from our windowless conference room down on Laurel Street, we'd bring them up to the model all the time. And it was almost as though they would come to life. They would begin to discover that we as a cohort had a way of working that went well beyond the norm within architectural practice back in the day. And the one thing about a non-hierarchical relationship within that big studio space that made it so enchanting for all of us, I think, is that at any given time, we were all deemed to be experts, even though we weren't. We were inexperienced. We were given a challenge to do a project that was so totally out of the box that at times it was extraordinarily daunting. And on top of all of that, this was a construction management project. We were building while we were designing. So I just wanted to set the table for the context of Robson Square. So we go to the next model. Yeah, this is another shot of the model that Eva started with, and it occupied a large part of the studio for the entire time that Robson Square was being developed. And it, again, 1/4 inch to the foot, it occupied, I would say, 2/3 of the width of the studio. And this is where the consultants, as well as ourselves, spent a lot of time cutting and pasting, taking Polaroid photographs. We would use Polaroids a lot, pin them up, because we needed a record of something, because 5 minutes later, something would change. So I'm kind of telling you all of this in a way to explain that for the most part, Robson Square was designed, I don't want to say from the outside in because that's patently untrue, but it was designed around this model. The building evolved around this model. And so it morphed from its beginnings in those early photographs that you saw into something quite amazing, which, if you see in the next slide, the real building actually represents the model to an enormous degree. And so the level of accuracy, the degree of commitment that everybody brought to the model table, as it were, really was reflected by the production team, the skin team, the other people that were working on putting together a package of documents so that Concordia could continue building. So I'm using that as a segue to three narratives that I'd like to share with you around how we worked in the office and how Arthur, as a teacher, not a deliberate teacher, but a kind of through osmosis teacher, had such a significant impact on our thinking, on the way we worked with him, on the way we worked with one another. So the first one, I'll start with the next slide to suggest to you that our model making skills included using Polaroid cameras and building pretty decent models that would explore interior spaces within the building. And you can see Eva on the left with her bell bottoms. We would take Polaroid photographs of one another and have them, we would try and do it as close as we could to the quarter-inch scale of the models or the half-inch scale of the models and pin them in place so that we could create these internal environments that were simulating a large part of the custom work that was happening within the context of the office. So the interior models became very important. The quality of the indoor environment starts with the 1970s, where people had discovered open office landscaping. And so the idea of not creating a cellular environment filled with offices for government workers was paramount to the interior planning of a building that had skylights and perimeter lighting and a very, very large footprint. And so we had a lighting consultant whose name was William Lamb, Bill Lamb, and he was a pioneer in the indirect lighting movement. And so all of Robson Square originally, with our precast structure, had what we called inverted U-beams, which used fluorescent lighting to create indirect light with no glare in all of the interior spaces within the complex. But part of that is understanding that at that time, and this is why we had a painting consultant, we had to have a level of reflectance that was enormously high so that we could have the kind of lighting output that would enable creature comfort at a desk at whatever the lighting levels were required to be at the time. I think it was something like 50 or 60-foot candles, doesn't matter. But a glare-free environment was what we needed to do. So my first story is that our painting consultant was an expert with the California Tint Scale Commission. Now, that's a real thing. You can look it up on the internet. Now they are in charge of the level of tinting that's allowed in automobile windows. Back then, they had chemical constituents that made up the different serial numbers of painting. And we needed to invent a new color, white. And that took forever. So it began with a process of optionitis, and this is perhaps the biggest optionitis story that I can recall, because it took us literally weeks to get down to the point where we could make a final decision, where Arthur would basically endorse a final decision on the color white. And I call this the C3L3 story, which is the chemical constituents are 3 parts burnt umber and 3 parts iron oxide. Go figure, write it down. There'll be a test at the end of this. Anyway, to make a longer story a little bit shorter and hopefully entertaining for you, Arthur was traveling a lot and we couldn't pin him down. And Concordia was really on our case to make a decision on this painting color because we were sequencing the construction. Robson Square was going to set the tone for the entire project. We had to get the color right, and we couldn't make a mistake. So I think we started with about 12 colors of white. And Bill Lamb is sort of looking over our shoulder from the sidelines. And I remember when we finally got it down to 3, Randy Jefferson and I went to Jim Wright, who's sitting over there. And we said, Jim, we have a strategy to, we'll get a final decision out of Arthur today, promise you. He said, okay, rolled his eyes and went back to work. In the meantime, Concordia is phoning him and saying, any decision yet, any decision yet? So Randy and I took our shortlisted candidates and had a bunch of boards made up. And we looked at the quality of them, and we ended up taking 3 up onto the roof deck on Laurel Street. And we grabbed Arthur at lunchtime. We knew we could always have him with us at lunchtime. He liked to eat peaches and sardines at lunch. So we would sit upstairs. And Randy, by the way, would end up being Frank Gehry's partner for 15 years and the project manager on Bilbao. So we were taking this, the color white, very seriously. So we said to Arthur, you have to make a decision. Otherwise, something terrible is going to happen. So he sat there, looked at the 3 boards. And when we were talking with him, Arthur would always listen. And to acknowledge that he was listening, he would say, yeah. So we'd be explaining, yeah. So we figured, okay, he's engaged. So finally, he looks at these 3 boards and he says, halfway between board number 2 and board number 3, we knew you could never second guess Arthur. He would always come up with yet another idea. So Randy and I looked at one another and we just grinned like Cheshire cats. So we went back downstairs after lunch. Arthur went on, probably jumped on a plane later on that afternoon. And so Jim says, so you got a decision? I said, yeah, I'm going to call Lionel Legault right now and tell him we've got C3L3 in the bag. That's great. How did you convince Arthur to make that selection? And I said, well, all 3 boards were the same paint. And yet he's still, this is the pup, and sassy. And yet he still saw, people have always asked me, because they tell the story all the time, do you think Arthur had you on? And I'm not sure, maybe he did, but if he did, he didn't mention anything. But I choose to believe that he saw some variation between board number 2 and board number 3. Board number 1 didn't count, okay? And I think it might have been because we painted the 3 boards the same, right? Same material, but the grain of the material, the tooth of the paper, in the daylight, probably cast minute shadows or some subtle kind of difference that ultimately C3L3 won the day. So that's I think my story about the color white. To me, in later years, I remember recounting this story to Jim Cheng. Actually, it wasn't that long ago. And Jim coined this phrase, which I thought was spectacular, and to me sums up everything about Arthur. He taught us to see. And a very simple phrase. He taught us to see. He could see and find things that obviously we couldn't. So the next one, I was waiting for Eva to say that one of Arthur's traits was that he was not at all nervous about turning things upside down. So not only did we have to live and work outside of the box, but we had to turn everything upside down. And as impractical and as crazy and as adventurous as some of these ideas might be, we were charged to make them work. So at some point early in the process, when we had the waterfalls and the ponds and whatnot, the program in the provincial government called for an ecumenical chapel in the interior spaces. And we were just musing about that with Arthur one afternoon. I think we were talking about the Flying Planters or something with Cornelia. Anyway, he came up with this idea. He said, you know what? We should put a skylight under the pool. And we all looked at one another and we said, what? It's turning it upside down. How about a pool skylight? And we thought, Arthur, this is just, okay. How do we do this? Well, luckily for us, we had Eugene Toffelmeyer as our glazing consultant. And he, I met him, I picked him up at the airport in my little red Toyota Corolla, and we went out for dinner. And he regaled me with all of his stories about being picked up by Philip Johnson's valet in his Mercedes limousine in New York City because he had just finished working on the Crystal Cathedral in Los Angeles. So Eugene was our guy. So we said, we have to do a skylight under the pool. Are you up for it? And Eugene looked at me and he said, are you up for it? I said, no, I'm scared shitless. I don't know what to do about this. I'm not sure how we can play this out. Oh, well, we'll work on it and we'll get back to you. So a couple of weeks later, and we're reporting to Arthur that we're working on the pool skylight. A couple of weeks later, I again pick up Eugene at the airport in my red Toyota. And again, we go out for dinner, different restaurant this time. And he says, I've got one for you, Barry. He said, not only can we do a pool skylight, a skylight under the pool, and I know that we can make the glass strong enough, but we're going to sit them on glass beams. When I first started in the office, I was 6 feet tall, and by this time I was like where I am now. And it was really a humbling experience, but man, it was fun. So this drawing, which is a working drawing of before the shop drawing process began, is of the pool skylight. And if you notice, there are 4 layers of glass. They're all tempered glass. There's a 1/8 inch layer of vinyl interlayer sandwiched in between all of them. And they sit on a glass beam, and all of the aluminum extrusions that are there are custom made. So this is completely turning the idea upside down and creating something that Arthur knew would be amazing. The quality of light that comes through that skylight over a chapel, I'm not sure if the chapel is still there, but the quality of light, the ripple effect, and when the sun shone, it was just magic. But we had to make this work. And so we ended up doing a series of mock-ups with 2 sheets of tempered glass, 1/2 inch, and with the interlayer and whatnot, put in a frame, and we took it over to the Granville Bridge and put it on the ground, and we went up to the top of the Granville Bridge and dropped a 15-pound stainless steel ball on the glass. So it dropped about 100 feet. People were estimating it was probably hitting the glass at about 60, 65 miles an hour. And it broke the outer layer. The tempered glass just shattered, but it stayed in the frame, didn't go through the second layer of glass, and it didn't break through the opening. So we knew we were onto something, and Eugene, we sent these photographs to him, and he said, I'm not sure that 2 layers is going to be enough, so we ended up doubling it. Each one of those panes of glass weighed over a ton. There was a final mock-up that was made that was 2 feet square, and I had it in my living room before the floor sagged for a number of years, and it took 3 people to move it because it weighed over 200 pounds. So that's the pool skylight story. So Arthur would take an idea where he would advance his thinking to the finished product, not knowing what the finished product was going to be, but he knew what the impact and the effect and the ambience would be. And it was all about the sight, it was all about the light, and it was all about creating a rhythm and kind of sense of order, and we call that cadence. And that's the title of the first book, Sight, Light, and Cadence. And so then, as Eva said, the lead goose, I love that analogy, would just sort of back away and leave it to the rest of us to sort through with ourselves and with our consultants to sort, the resolution of what turned out to be some pretty amazing components. What are we, 50 years later now? The pool skylight's still there. Okay, I worked for 5 years on Robson Square. I was in the office for 6, and I overlapped with the Evergreen building And I'll tell you a story about how the Evergreen building ended up in the office. Our client was John Laxton, who I'm sure in Vancouver everybody knows that name. And I was asked by Peter Petrol, who was in the office at the time, to go and meet with John because he had just leased the penthouse of the Marine building in the city. And it had this panoramic view of the water, and it was just a stunning location. So I ended up doing that project for him, and there were no drawings. We had to do our own measurements. I discovered there was a hidden mezzanine above the penthouse level of the Marine building, and it was about 600 or 700 square feet, and it wasn't in the lease. And John was a pretty shrewd character. And I'll leave it at that. And so he loved me because I found him extra space where his office ended up being in the Marine building, right up in the heavens. So he had this panoramic view of everywhere. So he takes me aside one day and he says, "Mate," he called me mate. He said, "I have a question for you." He said, I'm developing a property on the corner of Pender and Jervis Street. And I've got another firm of architects that do developer work all the time. And I really hate the scheme that they've done. So I jumped at the invitation. I said, "Well, would you give us a chance?" And of course, I don't know what I'm doing. I've never done anything for a developer before. And guess what? Neither had Arthur at the time. So he said, "I'll give you 3 weeks to put a proposal together. And we'll take a look at it." And I said, "Well, that's great. I'll go back. I'll talk to Arthur when he's back in town, and we'll see what we can do." So this site had nothing in front of it except the railway yards at the time, and a panoramic view of the mountains and the water and the seaplanes going back and forth. The site reminded John of the Marine building and his digs in the Marine building area. So I went to Arthur when he came back into town. I said, "Arthur, I don't know how to put this to you, but we've been offered the opportunity to do a project for John Laxton." I didn't know that John and Arthur had a long-standing relationship, a rather tumultuous one over the years. So here I am, the rookie, and I said, "Do you think that we should take a look at it?" And he said, "Well, Barry, we've never done a developer building before, but you know what? We can do a better building than any developer in town." He said, "So let's go for it." So we did a developer building. That's supposed to be a joke. There's nothing here that any developer in their right mind would take a look at. But all of this was about the site. All of this was about manipulating office space and creating, as John wanted, the Gardens of Babylon and views, uninterrupted views to the water at the time. But at the same time, from an urban design perspective, we were also conscious of not only views to the north, but creating view planes within the axial network of the street system that ran north-south. So on Jervis Street, go next slide, yeah. This is not a shot that very many people have seen, but we created a wider view plane than a developer normally would have done with a straight point block or slab block tower. So there was something there that became a really amazing opportunity. We had Hans Habler as our contractor, and he was a concrete specialist in the city. And I think his company's still around. I think his son is running it now. And because this was a developer-driven project, and because we had 2 things working against us, 3 things, I should say. Well, maybe 15 things. We had a client that couldn't make up his mind. We had Arthur, who was very hard to pin down. And we had Hans Habler, who had provided in the proposal that we ultimately won a guaranteed maximum upset price of $5 million for this project, 100,000 square feet. Guaranteed price. So we had a schedule and we had a budget and we had a lot of trouble meeting all of those criteria. So my final story here is that things progressed through the development permit stage, and now all of a sudden we're gearing up for construction start. But we have some formative decisions that still need to be made on the building skin. So Hans came to me one day and he said, Barry, I can't wait for Arthur. We have to go and see him. Where is he? We'll fly to see him. So without packing any bags, just a bunch of drawings and a couple of pencils and a kind of little model that I had made of the typical building skin with the eyebrow. We jumped on the red eye and went to Toronto and pissed off all the people in the Toronto office because Arthur was in Toronto, and like the rest of us, we were always scrambling for his attention. So for us to come to Toronto to steal time away from the Toronto office, it was not seen to be a very good thing. In any event, we met with Arthur. We had to talk about a number of things. At the time, there was a big deal going on about whether this would be a precast building or a cast-in-place building. Well, hence, Habler wanted control, of course, of as much of it as he could. And being a cast-in-place concrete expert, it wasn't hard for him to convince Arthur that would be the route that we would take. We also were looking at glass block as the glazing module in the we'll go to the last one and then we'll double back. We were looking at glass block at one point to get that kind of rippled light effect in the eyebrow area, and ultimately, for a number of reasons, Arthur decided that we would stay with glass. It was a more pragmatic solution, but a much better solution. And the third thing, which is implied in that cross section and also in the previous slide, David, if you want to go back to it, we were working, of course, with Cornelia on the landscape piece. And because it's a developer building, we had slab bands, no beams. So all the loading on the floors was contingent on a really pragmatic solution. So the weight of the planters, the depth of the planters was pretty much fixed. And at one point, Arthur wanted to have trees in the planters. And I tried to explain to him that ivy would be a lot easier. And that's what Cornelia was looking for. Ultimately, we settled on Cornelia's wishes. And I think there are only a handful of trees that showed up over columns in the building. But those were the kinds of decisions that were being made while working drawings were underway, while demolition and excavation was happening on a guaranteed maximum upset price developer building. Arthur never changed the way he worked on any project. It was very zen in many ways. He would go back to ground zero and start all over again, start his thinking process right from the get-go and try and, in a way, exhale all of the other influences that he may have had that influence his decision-making, either from traveling or from just working with the team in the office. And so Pender Jervis became the Evergreen Building, and we did it. It was amazing. And it is, to my knowledge, the first contemporary architecture in Vancouver to reach heritage status. And that happened because at one point it was threatened with demolition. So I'm a lucky guy to have had the chance to work on these kinds of one-off projects, crazy projects in many ways. But the ultimate impact of both Robson Square and Evergreen on a city made us realize that site was the number one criterion in the back of his mind. And when it came to Arthur and his travels, I think he digested the environment all around the world from that first perspective. Second was light and the quality of it, and understanding that he would always talk about the milky light here on the coast at sea level, where the horizon is always vaporized because there's so much water in the air. I live on the prairie, where I have to wear sunglasses all day long because I'm 2,300 feet above sea level. So the sun is so intense that the quality of light and the edges of buildings against the sky are razor sharp. Not the case here. So Arthur understood all of that, and he taught us all of that through just speaking with him. He would say something, and you'd go home at night and talk over the dinner table and say, you know what, I'm not sure what he meant. And then we'd meet in the coffee corner in the office on Monday morning and say, I think I know what he meant. And it was this process of exploration and discovery that he encouraged. And I think I would like to think that he was able to take from us as a cohort a number of ideas as stimulants. And would that enable him to focus on the task at hand? Because at any given time, there were 30 different projects, and having Arthur not be scattered when he's in a meeting, figuring out how to focus. We think that we were able to help him focus by virtue of the passion and the optionitis way of working that became the zeitgeist of the office, and that enabled him to do what he did best. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think history will remember him as well as I hope they will. That's what I have to say.
Thank you very much, Barry. Can you hear me all right? Coming through? Great. The last 10 minutes or so will be presented in Wynn's name. I mentioned earlier that he was unable to join us today, but played a key role, as did Nick Milkovich, in the planning sessions for this and the second roundtable this afternoon. A few words about Wynn, for those of you who don't know him. His career in Arthur's office, and by extension in Nick's office, spanned over 25 years. He worked in the Toronto office from 1982 to 89, mainly on competitions, while teaching at the University of Toronto. He was also very interested in the differences in the culture of the office between the projects that were real and the projects that were competition submissions. He relocated to the Vancouver office, and throughout the 90s, freelanced as a design consultant until the completion of the Museum of Glass. In 2002, he moved to Seattle, but continued to collaborate with Arthur and with Nick until 2008, when he returned to Vancouver. The next three images are quite interesting to all of us. We found them. These are stills from the film that many of you probably know, Concrete Poetry, by Michel Smolkin. And it describes a moment, or a series of moments, an incident in Nick's office that really, I think, for us, captures the spirit of that amazing studio. I don't know what the occasion was. It looks like Wynn and Arthur are about to do a high five. Wynn is kind of watching, looking fairly amused at the whole thing. So Wynn, of course, is the one in the middle. I didn't have to tell you that. He talked a lot about the. Let me read you what he wrote about those years. He talked a lot about the. First of all, the project he did for the Chicago Library competition, and these images here are from another film called Design Wars, which was produced by PBS, WGBH in Boston. These are the stills are maybe not as high resolution as they should be, but they do capture a lot of the ideas that Wynn came back to again and again in our planning sessions, and that both Eva and Barry have talked about, is the profusion of models in the office. And most of the images that Wynn wanted included in this presentation basically zoom in on that. He sees the models that Eva and Barry both described as representative of a kind of attitude and openness that no idea could be rejected. Everything worked. And of course, Wynn and Barry also referred to the use of Polaroids, probably an SX70 in those days. Each image cost $1, which was actually quite a lot of money in those days. But we went through them one after another, and they become a very interesting part of the record in the office and very, very often on site. So there's an example of some of the work on the Chicago Library. And here's these are two images that Wynn wanted included, where you see Arthur not only looking over Wynn's shoulder, but actively engaged in a design discussion about the model itself. You can't see it there, but maybe here. They were both, I think, taking turns actually using the knife in Wynn's hand there as an instrument, or as a kind of medium of conversation about the project. This image was also extremely important to Wynn, and I'll explain why in a minute. The project, it was a competition entry for the Hanover World Expo 2000. It was unsuccessful for a variety of reasons, but the drawing on the left, maybe part of the submission, is reflected, of course, in that newspaper article. I think it's a special edition of the Vancouver Sun. I don't have the date handy. But for Wynne, let me just read you what he wrote about that. He said, the reason I want to show this image is because this photograph of Arthur shows how happy he was at this time in 2000 after such a difficult time in his personal life and business life, having lost his firm and professional identity as an architect. And that's a story I think everyone knows about. By this time, this is Wynne talking, the waterfall building was completed and it was winning awards. The image of the hydrogen pavilion in the newspaper article did not get built, but we love working on this with the former Premier of Saskatchewan. We had submitted the design to the Canadian government, but they had already selected a scheme for the pavilion at the Hanover Expo. This was a very rich period in Arthur's career because we had so much talent working together in Nick's office and with the Arthur Erickson Corporation that, of course, included Alan Bell and Willie Brugger, among others. Wynne goes on, he says, it was the most intense period I've ever worked, dancing between real projects that got built and design competitions. Our studio at Nick's during the 90s really felt like an atelier. This photograph of Arthur really captured his happiness at that time. So what we thought we could do with that introduction is basically run you through the next few images of projects that refer to the importance of the three-dimensional model in the office. And I think everyone in this room understands how the 3D model, a model that you walk by every time you come from the kitchenette with a coffee, becomes a kind of an opportunity for a conversation between colleagues working on different levels or opposite sides of the studio. Here's another image of the hydrogen pavilion, not built. This is a project in Hangzhou, in China. The name of the project was the Westlake Cultural Center, and also not built. But once again, you see very clearly in the image the importance of the model as a kind of medium of design exchange and conversation. And the pins that Eva referred to earlier, you see appearing almost like an aspect of the design itself. Other models, they were using a hot wire, probably in a form of styrofoam, and anything else that for the team involved would represent something in the advancement in the evolution of the ideas. The waterfall building, of course, was a landmark project in those years, award-winning, as Nick, or as we referred to just a second ago. That's an image that's very familiar. Many years ago, I was able to, when the walkway and staircase was still open, I was able to actually get up on the roof and capture an image of the place that that is extremely convincing. This is the Tacoma Glass Museum, and Wynne, again, especially wanted us to include more images than otherwise about that project, again, because of the nature in which it evolved. He ended up moving to Seattle after the project, and one of the photographs he wanted us to include was this one, which I think Wynne himself took. And that's Arthur. The building is complete, and the day is the opening ceremony for the building, and Arthur is just finding his way on his own to where the ceremonies are about to take place. The drawings themselves are also extraordinary. I think these are actually by Wynne at some point in the design process, and the conceptual sketch here, you think, we're convinced is Arthur's. And finally, here, a photograph I took in Nick's office in August 2023, during a project that a number of us from McGill carried out, where we interviewed something like 25, many of whom are in the room now, so-called alumni of the office in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And these models captured very much the spirit of collaboration and the importance of the model. You know, the large-scale version of the cone, which was built, of course, on the birder cones that you see all over the north and in BC and Alberta. In the middle, of course, is a model at one point in the evolution of the scheme, and down below a much earlier conceptual model. And we thought we would close this part of the session with this image. Going back to the beginning, the day would be a day in late May or early June in the spring of 1950, and it's Arthur's graduation day. His mother, Myrtle, is in the center, and that smiling character off to the left is one of his favorite. It was his favorite teacher, a man named Professor Gordon Webber. Arthur, those of you who have read Seven Stones or the original New Yorker article may remember that in that article, one of the wonderful things about that article is that it's mostly Arthur's voice. I think Edith Iglauer recorded most, or if not all, of their conversations, and draws heavily verbatim from the insights she gained walking around with Arthur and exploring his work with him. In that article, at one point, he cites three major influences on his work. The first was his mother. The second was Lauren Harris, who was a very powerful influence. And the third, of course, was Gordon Webber, sitting there on the left. Before I open the room to a Q&A, I just wanted to thank a little more formally the group at UBC Sala and UBC Robson Square for all the work they've done to bring this to a realization. My colleagues in the Arthur Erickson Foundation, who are also involved, in particular Bernadette Ma, who was the project manager for the Arthur Erickson Centenary program, with funding from the Celebration and Commemoration Program of Canadian Heritage Government Canada. And she has very eloquently, and very elegantly, and very professionally managed two separate programs with funds from that source. And then finally, the other panelists and speakers, I included Wynne and Nick, because as I said earlier, they were both very active and involved in the preparations for this day, as well as Michael Covo, Nick Milka, Bridget, and Adele Weider, who will be speaking this afternoon. So having said that, I think we can just go to the Q&A. Leslie.
Hi, I'm Leslie Van Duzer. I have a question.
Sure.
Are there any efforts underway currently to record the oral histories
Yes.
of those who were so close to Arthur? Could you talk about that?
Briefly, it's a work in progress. We have a doctoral student at McGill who is actually not an architect, but from Vancouver, very well aware of the body of work from the various incarnations of Arthur's and Nick's offices. And her thesis topic is collaboration in the practice of Arthur Erickson. In the summer of 2023, it started in the summer of 2022, but it took us a long time to get Research Ethics Board approval because of the nature and breadth of the project. In the summer, we did a couple of interviews then, but most of the interviews were done in the late summer of 2023. And many of the interviewees are actually in the room. Reiner, you're here. I think Jim, you were also interviewed. Eva and several others. So those interviews lasted from maybe an hour to, in Nick Milkovich's case, for example, 6 or 7. Some of them have been transcribed. Most are in the process of transcription. And for the time being, the material or the information and ideas that have been generated are being kind of organized by the student. Her name is Katrin Zovgorodny Friedman, and she's actually probably going to complete the project at the end of sometime in 2026. So Leslie, it's a great question, and it's a work in progress. We did a project in 1996 also at McGill on the 100th anniversary of the school, where we conducted video interviews with 100 alumni of the school. Those interviews are online on the McGill University site. Arthur's interview, which is extremely insightful, and I suspect some of you, Trevor and others, have drawn from some of those interviews. And they're all accessible online. Arthur's is one of the few that has actually been edited. The ums and ahs and spelling mistakes have been corrected and so on and so forth. So those are two projects. One more or less frozen, like a mosquito trapped in amber, and the other very much underway.
My name is Linda Moore. I worked with Arthur in the late 80s. And I had John Laxton as a client on the site adjacent to the Evergreen building. So I learned a lot listening to you talk about the Evergreen building, because that was such an inspirational leap and inspiration for the towers that followed. I just wanted to mention that Arthur, I guess I'm building on Wynn's comment of how happy Arthur was. In the early 2000s, I was working at UBC as the project manager for the 5 new neighborhoods. And I was also the project manager for the University Boulevard architectural competition, which was an international competition. And Arthur was on our jury. And I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention, because he made, he was Arthur during all the discussions. So thoughtful, so insightful, and so happy. So I just wanted to add that.
I just want to mention a little story that my students were doing some research at BCIT on Arthur in mid-2000s. And they went to Arthur's office, or Nick's office, and wanted to interview him, and they did. And Arthur gave them his drawings, originals, not copies, and models, and they took them to school, their presentation, with his original drawings and his models. And it was pretty amazing that he let them out of the office, but he was such a good collaborator, an amazing person to loan out to students he didn't even know his work. Mm-hmm.
Questions about methodology in the office. So there's been a big emphasis on the role of models today in all 3 of your presentations. I'm curious to hear a little bit more the details of the methodology of the office, the relationship between drawing and models, and like how Arthur himself or those collaborators working alongside him what was the interface? What was would the model be redrawn? Would new sketches be unfolding alongside the model? So that's kind of one question. Another question is, as projects progressed, how active was Arthur himself during the construction phase? Did he visit the construction sites regularly? Were decisions made as things were getting built? Were things taken down as like, oh gosh, let's try something else? I'm curious about that.
Can I just, I'll reply very quickly first with another comment of Wynn's. Wynn, as I think I might have mentioned in my introduction of him, he talked a lot about the difference between the projects that were real and the competitions. And for him, we were all curious what he meant by that. He probably did more work in competitions than most people here. And he talked about the after hours, what he called the after hours studio culture, which he characterized as more relaxed, zero hierarchy, and open. And because he was more relaxed, he said Arthur would often inform the conversations about what was going on with descriptions of his experiences abroad, which in many cases were related to some of the conceptual gestures that we find even in projects like this one. Eva or Barry, do you want to comment on Matthew's question?
Yeah, on the question of models to drawings, each person might have a different recollection, but mine is that it was all models. If possible, I spend 90% of my time on models. The drawings really had a secondary purpose, but again, that's my personal experience. And but my role was primarily on the exterior of Robson Square, coordinating with Cornelia and what we call the floor. The other thing we always did, as an aside, is name things. I don't know why. but we did. There were the flying planters and the boxes and the stramps, and those were all just came out of casual conversations, but it was all model language.
The models were everything, but Arthur, we always thought that Arthur couldn't draw, which is really bizarre. And he didn't make any bones about claiming that he could, to be honest. And yet, the one sketch that David showed of the Glass Museum, we know it's Arthur's drawing. I have experience watching him draw, and he's like he would work on an idea and would lift the pencil off the page 2 or 3 times, but the idea would morph and become fluid and something. And so there was a kind of expression in his drawing that I found quite unique and quite remarkable. So to say that he couldn't draw was a misnomer. He could draw, but he drew in his own way. To translate that into, let's say, you work on a project for 5 years, you spend a large part of your time on a job site, you spend a large part of your time working on drawings and details. I mean, I think the shop drawings for the pool skylight was like 2 months of solid effort in my case, and many other areas. Having said that, there were times I can remember, not often, where I would have a question about something. And if Arthur was in the office and if I could grab him, and usually it was over his lunch period because his time was organized by Millie and everybody else in the office, where grabbing him for a precious moment was a special time. He was it was not that he was inaccessible, but he was inaccessible. It's very, very hard to pin down and to capture. So I can recall asking a couple of questions about a drawing. And again, I'll go back to the glazing package for Robson Square specifically. But the other thing I wanted to mention that I think this is a real measure of the office. Arthur had a phenomenal trust in everybody. He knew that if we ran into a roadblock or ran into a problem, someone would come and tell him about it. And it didn't matter what phase of a project you were in. If it was important, he knew and trusted that we would bring that importance to him for a discussion. Sometimes it would not be deemed to be that critical. Other times it would be, better think about this. Okay. So he was always on, but I would say not hands-on when it came to job site work. I don't remember ever seeing him with a hard hat. I don't remember him being on a job site in my experience. I know that there are others that will say different things. But again, we deal with what we live with. But to me, the first thing I thought of with your question was the level of trust in the office. It was palpable.
I have a question in reverse, and that is that we old geezers have the question of why we so love models, and now the new generation think it's the same on computer. When we talk to students, most of them are very comfortable with what they create, and the old folks just don't believe that it has the same response. So I don't think we know the answer, but I thought maybe you do.
We had sort of a nice incident, actually.
Hold closer.
When the judges were sort of always a little bit concerned about, losing their columns, the rotunda in the old building. So we joked in the office about the concrete knees that hold up the space frame, the whole roof. I said, those are columns too. So Arthur was quite excited. So I said, what we do is we asked all the judges to come to the site. And Arthur said, here are your columns. And he did it with real flair and animation, and it was really successful. Everybody went away and, here are the columns. That was the one incident I remember on site.
Thank you very much.
I have a people and nation question for Eva, Barry. Maybe Reiner want to jump in on this. There was no office like Arthur's in Canada for its international staff. Unbelievable range of people. Eva, you from the United States, Kiyoshi and others from Japan, Reiner from Europe. You go through the list, Bing Tom from Hong Kong. There's no team ever like that before in Canada. And indeed, if you think in architectural history, how many firms have practiced extensively in 3 different continents? There's not a huge tradition of global practice before Arthur. You can make a case for Baker in India, South Africa, and Europe. There's not many. I want to hear from the staff, how did having a global staff enable doing global work, or is it all Arthur's preferences expressed?
I'm happy to take that one on because I first of all, I think we loved it. Like as a member of the staff, that it helped with the whole concept of the open mind. Like I go back to my quiet entry versus Japan quiet entries. Now, as far as it influencing, that's internally. I think we loved it. Externally, I think somebody else. I'm not sure how to answer that. It's other than it was welcome, and I think, frankly, more of society should be together as we were in that studio, right? If you put that in the Middle East or in Eastern Europe, make them have our composition of international. Sorry, not to go into politics.
We used to refer to the office as the United Nations. We had people from all around the world, and it was amazing. And I do think that in my case, and I know for a lot of people, not only did we learn from Arthur, but we learned a lot from one another, from their cultural history, their cultural norms, just having coffee, talking about family or travels. The kind of connections that people enjoyed within the office was one of, I don't want to exaggerate by saying enormous camaraderie, but there was significant camaraderie. I mean, I remember Shanti Ghosh, who was one of our construction managers. And I learned more from him about life than I can think of anyone else in the office. And I think that's one of the things that I see today, not missing, but not as strong or not as vibrant in the nature of current offices where everyone's plugged into their earbuds and glued to their screens. The level of interaction is not the same as it was when we were in the office. And I think the architecture of the office had a huge impact on that because it was a great big studio. And the Toronto office, having seen it, was nothing like that at all. And the kind of the livelihood and the nature of practice in the Toronto office was not the same as it was on Laurel Street. Laurel Street was, I think, a really unique experience.
We had a motto that said, "We're in this for the fun and the money," and we knew there wasn't much money. So we had a great time. We had a lot of fun. And today is for free.
I'm Hector, actually architect here, born in Peru. Well, is the emphasis on mentioning the bankruptcy of Erickson? Don't you think that this diminishes his legacy? Because if I go to ChatGPT and ask which architects has gone bankrupt in the 20th century, is it Frank Lloyd Wright, David Adjaye, Philip Johnson, and we go through their books and they don't mention that because actually they want to focus on what is positive, no, which is the legacy. And this legacy, where is it now? Because I have worked in several Vancouver offices, and even in one social housing project, I worked with a Czech architect. We were saying this looks like a Soviet housing project from the 1970s. And my Czech colleague said, actually, no, you go to Czech Republic and you will see more quality in those buildings that were mass produced. No, this is not even close to the Familistère in 19th century France. No. So where are we now? Where is this legacy being taken over now? We are more in a moment where everything is budget, schedules, CCDC contracts, and all these beautiful things that I learned in my school in Peru back in the 70s. No, actually 80s. That the model is, look what is happening now in India with Louis Kahn. Look what is happening in Vancouver with Arthur Erickson. Don't look what is doing, I forgot, Paul Rudolph in England. No, this is the direction. This is architecture made not just for Canada or for India. It's made for all the world because it's beautiful, it's cheap, and it will have a long-standing, a large lifespan. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll start very quick. Barry, did you want to say something? Yeah, I was going to start just by saying, thank you for your question. The Arthur Erickson Foundation has as one of his major goals the preservation and protection of the legacy, including its dissemination. We're trying to get it back into the schools, back into the public eye. So the events of the centenary were a small part of that. In response to Leslie's very interesting question earlier too about collecting the stories, we were also putting together an index of the work. We have a listing now of something like 840 different projects over 50 plus years. And one of the things we're trying to do for each one of them is identify the key players and the consultants, who the project architects were, and so on and so forth. One of the hardest things about that has been to actually identify which projects were built and which were unbuilt. That's proved to be quite elusive. Barry, you wanted to say something.
Our friend and colleague Phyllis Lambert has said many times that Arthur's work and his legacy has yet to be fully scholastically studied and documented. And the purpose of this last year and a bit has been to try and build awareness around that reality. And the focus of the foundation in terms of its role is stewardship, number one, and we need a lot of it here. And secondly, I think that when it comes to the personal life and the bankruptcies and the way that impacted the office, to us that's secondary to the big picture, which is Arthur deserves to be remembered in our collective viewpoint as one of the most influential designers and creative minds of the 20th century. And I think that's our mandate.
One more quick comment. The other answer to your question is that a good part of the legacy is in the portfolios of built work of a good number of people in this room who have moved to the office, and this is a big part of what we're trying to do at the foundation. The stewardship, which Barry referred to, is an issue that we thought might come up, and maybe I can close the session by just reminding you not so much of some of the battles we've won as a foundation with the province and with UBC on various aspects, various projects over the last 10 or 15 years, but an image of one of the battles that we lost, which is this one. Whenever I come, I try to stay in the wall center because there's a section of the rooms all look down in Robson Square and get some amazing photographs. So we were approached about a little over a year ago by the stewards of Robson Square, which is the province of BC, with our thoughts on the proposal to resurface the bridge with an elastomeric membrane. The cast-in-place concrete tiles were deteriorating badly. Of course, the stone has survived very well. And we put them in touch with Nick, who put them in touch with the project architect of the restoration of Robson Street not so long ago. And in the end, the difference between the budget of the solution proposed and the budget of the project that should have been built the difference was too great. And I discovered only yesterday that what you see here, these are images I took about a year ago of the deterioration, mostly related to drainage, I think. And that's what I found yesterday on the bridge. So that elastomeric membrane is what you see around the trees on Howe and Hornby Street, but where it actually makes sense. It has some resilience, and as the roots move up and down, it gives a little bit, but it makes no sense here. And what discouraged us was that there was no attempt to kind of integrate it in any way with the material palette, colors, and language of it. So again, Senor, in answer to your question, it's an ongoing battle, the protection and preservation of the legacy. And we continue to work with the province, and we'll win the next one.
A warm round of applause for our panelists. Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Wynn. Thank you, David.